Thank you all for joining today's Space Syntax Lab seminar. This marks the first talk of the new term, which will feature presentations on topics ranging from urban complexity in post-industrial cities, advancements in predicting pedestrian movement, to impacts of transport networks, as well as the integration of ecological research within space syntax. Today, we turn our focus to modeling habitat functionality, and Dr. Oskar Kindvall will introduce a new methodology for assessing habitat functionality and demonstrating its significance in maintaining and enhancing the ecological value of urban green and blue spaces. Oskar is an associate professor in ecology, specializing in population dynamics, animal dispersal, and landscape modeling. He currently works as a senior environmental consultant, focusing on species conservation, risk assessment, sustainable development, and transport infrastructure planning. In addition, he's a guest researcher at the Chalmers University of Technology in Gothenburg, Sweden, where he collaborates with the Spatial Morphology Group, which many of you are familiar with. His research integrates ecological effect analyses of urban transformations with the space syntax modeling framework. And before we start, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat so we can address them at the very end. And with this, I'd like to hand over to you, Oskar. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much, Kimon, and thank you very much for inviting me to these seminars. I'm very glad to be able to speak here, and my main focus will be about things I have already written about habitat functionality in a paper that was published in before Christmas. But I will give you some more examples than you can find in that paper. I have this agenda for my talk. I will give you a brief background of the theory behind the modeling I will present. And I will also present the software that we have developed within a recent project, show you how it works and how it can be handled. I will also describe how you can integrate the space syntax theory and modeling into the habitat network modeling in a very neat way. And then I will show you some example how to assess impacts on biodiversity of different changes or alterations of transport infrastructure or urban transformations of different kind. I will also show how one can use this modeling framework to, in an optimal way, find places where habitat restoration makes a great benefit. In many previous modeling or more established modeling frameworks, it's not really possible to find the areas directly. You have to test or use your intuition, which sometimes could be very good, of course. But I think with this new technique, it is really easy to find areas to work with for restorations and mitigations and different kinds to support biodiversity or improve the situation for biodiversity, especially maybe in urban environments where this is quite problematic. Habitat network models, traditionally, these are very similar to the models developed within the space syntax concept, and so we use very much vector-based models for also handling different species, and these are based on the idea of identifying habitat patches as the nodes in a network, and finding the dispersal links in between them. And based on this kind of models, it's very easy to make the same kind of analysis with centrality measurements of different kinds, which can tell you a lot about which patches or which paths that are most important for the long-time survival of a population. However, I have found when working with this that more raster-based models are a little bit more realistic and also less dependent on the spatial scale. And habitat functionality is something that is a well described mechanism or phenomenon or important factor when understanding the importance of landscape or the landscape composition and how functional it is for a certain species. However, it's quite recently that people are starting to publish ways of handling habitat functionality in a simple way, and these kinds of models they are based on rasters. So you have you look at the landscape as a high resolution pixel image or map, and in the figure you see here there are 3 rows, and above is an example that you have one before and one after scenario to test an effect of adding a big water pond for energy production, electricity, and here we can see with the habitat functionality or the habitat quality, the second row, which is the habitat quality maps before and after this big dam is applied to this environment, and the quality doesn't change except for where the dam the pond is set. But when you look at the last row here, you have a pair of images showing how the functionality changes. So, and the functionality is something that in relation to habitat, it's very much the same thing as a habitat quality, but it also includes the connectivity. So when adding a big water body like this in the landscape, it will reduce the possibilities for some animals to move easily to all high quality areas. And this is what functionality is about. Habitat can be very good, but if they are not reachable by the specific species, then it can't be used. So then it's not functional. What this concept highlights is the importance of connectivity between landscape elements of different with different ecological function. It could be places where they reproduce and places where they feed, places where they hibernate or find shelter for other reasons. And all these things have to be rather connected to be useful or functional for the species. Having this concept in hand and modeling this, you don't really require to be able to identify distinct habitat patches. You can actually work with the whole landscape, and every pixel may have a value for the species. It could be that it's only differ in quality and in reachability or connectivity. And this means that you can also assess the changes within patches. And sometimes the scale of the planning within city or in other planning projects, the scale could be set to a very small area. And for some species that is too small to handle with patch based modeling, because everything that happens is within a single patch or so. And or maybe the things that happens is outside the patch, but the things that happens outside patches could affect the dispersal or the connectivity in the landscape. For example, add a new roads, which creates higher mortality risks and barrier effects for the dispersal. But this concept of habitat functionality and working with the raster-based modeling allow us to work on all scales. And it's also when you don't need to be able to define distinct habitat patches or be able to draw maps of the habitat in that way, then it's also applicable to more types of species and organisms. For example, imagine big animals like raw deer or moose or such animals that move over very big areas, and they feed in very many different biotopes. Then it's very hard to say what is a patch and what is not a patch. They use the whole landscape. And they even move around quite a lot in urban areas, especially roe deer is quite common, at least in Sweden, within the cities. But you don't see them too often because they are mainly nocturnal in their life. And they can be. And this measurement is also very good for different kind of assessment of various impacts of changes in the urban environment or in changes of transport infrastructure. I said this was a quite new concept, or the way of modeling it is a new thing actually among ecologists. I have realized that I have made the earliest tests of this modeling framework. I started to actually build models of this kind in 2017, and this is an example with bats where I used this modeling to model very big landscape. On the map to the right, you see a big part of southern Sweden modeled in this way, with a resolution of pixels with 10 times 10 meters. And we published a paper about that shows that it worked quite well to predict both the abundance of bats and the number of species of bats. And after that, it had been published also papers by another research group that have developed also software. I will not talk so much about that, but there is rising research in this field. And here is the paper I have recently published, which is describing how it can be applied on urban issues or urban environments. The software and also the things I will talk about now in this talk, all the things have arisen in a research project that that was funded by the Swedish Research Council, Formas. And within that project, we developed a tool. We also developed tools for focusing on the integration of the impact assessment in several aspects, like social and economical and ecological and cultural historical aspects, and with the focus of transport infrastructure and how the planning of this in urban environments can be assessed, or the effects of the different solutions or different changes. And this was a project that with collaboration both with consultant companies and the Swedish Transport Administration and the Gothenburg region, which is an organization also working with transport planning and so on, and Chalmers, which were the leading part of this. I will now describe the tool that we developed within this project, and we have called this tool Habitat Network Analysis Tool, and this can be downloaded for free from this address, and here it's constructed as plugin to QGIS, and so it's without any licenses to work with this, and it's quite simple. It's only 3 variables that have to be defined when you start this tool or this plugin. You have to put in you have to have a biotope map to start with, a raster-based biotope map, like a land cover map. And you have to have a file with parameters. And that is quite complicated thing, so I will show you that in detail. And you have to put out an output folder on your computer where all the data will be stored, the output data. And when you are running this, you can just click on the imported biotope map and so on. So it's quite easy to then you just run it. And when you run this, a lot of things happens, which are very practical. If you have done this manually, we realize it saves you a lot of work. You have this biotope map, and you have this file with parameters, and then you can, when you hit the button for running this, you will automatically generate a couple of maps. First, it will generate a friction raster, which is a raster describing the barrier effects of different biotopes for each pixel in the landscape. So roads and such things will have a certain friction value in this raster, and the biotopes that are not barriers will have a friction value of 1, and then all the barriers will have higher values in friction, and that will affect the dispersal modeling in this tool. So based on an algorithm which is called cost distance, the dispersal probability can be predicted in this model. So it actually produced 2 maps. It produced a cost distance map, a raster, but also dispersal probability raster, which is the estimated probability given a certain average movement distance by the organism. And for biologists, that is somewhat more intuitive to think about, having a variable that range from 100% to whatever you think is the minimum dispersal rate that you want to analyze. Another thing that the program calculates is the habitat quality. And the habitat quality map is something that is generated directly from the parameter values combination with the certain biotope. So it translates the biotope map to something that is showing the value at each pixel for the focal organism. And based on the dispersal probability map and the habitat quality map, it calculates the habitat functionality map, which is the map in the lower right. So this is how habitat functionality is modeled. This is the basic idea, combining information of habitat quality, which might range from 0 and whatever value you have for the best habitats. And then combining that with multiplying with the probability that the individuals or the specimens of a certain organism reach each pixel from pixels that works as a source for all the individuals in the populations. And that could be habitats where the species reproduce or where it hibernates or other things that they have to go back and forth to during its lifetime. This model also generates information that can be used in a more classical way, producing traditional habitat network models. So based on this information, the dispersal probabilities and the information you get for patches of different quality, you can go on and do the classical habitat network analysis as well. I will not talk much more about that because I think these models are not that useful actually on every scale within cities. So I will now continue to just talk about the dispersal probability maps and the habitat functionality maps. But let us see now first on the parameter settings and how it handles in the model. It works as a sheet in Excel, which make it also a good documentation of what you have been running and the different models that you run. Focusing first on this column here, which have the header biotope code, you see different integer values here, and that is the values that could be found in the biotope map. So each number here has to correspond to something in the biotope map. And for example, 111 here correspond to what is pine forest in the biotope map. But it could be any type of biotope, or it could also be roads, buildings, and things that are really urban features that goes into the model. And for each of these biotopes and for each of the species, one has to define the quality parameter. So in this case, this is coniferous bird species, this network name. And these three columns represent the parameters for that species. And here is another example where it's birds living in deciduous forest. And when you look at the pine forest, which is a coniferous tree, a forest of coniferous trees, quality is set quite high in this case, and lower for the deciduous forest, which are another type of trees, which is given high quality in this biotope instead. And in the second column here, for each species, which is named source, you put 1 for all the biotopes where there is reproduction, or where all the specimens are expected to arise and disperse back and forth from. And in the third column, you have the friction values, which determines the dispersal, how effectively the movements of the individuals will be in the landscape. And for the pine forest, in this case, the friction is 1, and that tells the model that the movement is totally free in a sense. It will only be affected by how far can this organism or these birds fly on average. And the average distance is given here for each species in the top row here. So average dispersal distance has to be specified. And also the minimal dispersal probability that we want the tool to calculate. And that is more of a thing that you can, if you want to really understand long-term dispersal, you have to make that value very small. But on the other hand, in some cases you can also put a quite big value there. It's a value between some very low value to 1. And as you saw in the previous table, it was 2 different species that were presented there with their parameter values. In this case, you see several species or different variants of the same species. It could be also that you change some of the parameter values just to test what happens if some values are not that certain, and then you can test a range of parameter values to see the effects on the modeling. And when you have done this, so you have arranged a file with several species at the same time, you run all these species at the same time, and that makes it very effective, as in most cases you run this kind of modeling for one species at a time, and in this case you make it very fast to get a picture of different types of species, how they will react. For example, if we add a new road in an area, so some of the species maybe will not be affected very much, but other ones will. So that is very interesting if you will want to have a good idea about what happened with biodiversity in a broader sense, not just single species. And what happens when you have made this and everything is successful is that the different species that you model at the same time, they end up as group here, and the data within it is like you have a source raster which shows the biotopes or the distribution of biotopes that works as a source for the dispersal, and you will get this functional map which is here shown for butterflies, and you will get the dispersal raster and a quality raster, and also the cost distance raster, as I mentioned, and you will see the friction raster, which show the barriers in the system. And all of these are also stored in different folders where you wanted them to be stored, and that makes them also very, very easy to send to other peoples and continue to work with in other modeling programs and different plans and so on. And this is very neat and very easy, but there is some work to do before you can make good modeling with this. Of course, you have to be an ecologist or be very familiar with the modeling framework and also with the organisms that you have to work to set the parameters correctly. And that is, but once you have done that, I think most planners will be able to do this work by themselves. So we can share these parameter files with each other and hopefully also produce better and better input parameters for future modeling by sharing and testing this in different cities and different environments. But one work that also has to be done is actually to work with the input biotope map. You can use, of course, the land cover map as it is. If you have national land cover map, can be used in many cases directly, but it is in most cases more realistic to add some other information to it. And this is especially true for small and narrow biotopes like streams, narrow streams and small ponds. And it could also be very valuable trees with holes, big old trees with holes, which in the case of the standard land cover maps are not included or not visible, as the resolution might be 10 times 10 meters. Then a tree will not appear there in most cases, or a very narrow stream will not appear there either. And in the case of the Swedish land cover map, all infrastructure, all transport infrastructure is actually just one pixel value. It's just one biotope code. And that is not very good if you think of different roads depending on the amount of traffic using the roads and so on. We'll have very different barrier effects on different organisms. And to handle that, one wants to add more types of road to the map. So I usually add many types of waters. I add many types of roads and buildings. I could also add. And in this project, in the collaboration with the Space Syntax group, we have found ways of integrating the modeling of the city morphology or the road networks and so on, and using the PST tool, which also is a plugin for QGIS. Hope you know about that tool. It can be used to calculate centralities of roads and many other things. And in this case, I have started to use that tool to calculate angular betweenness centralities of roads at a scale of 15 kilometers. And then I get a variable that is really very much correlated to the amount or the traffic volumes of motorized traffic. And in the biotope map you see here, you see some red, and that is roads with high numbers or estimates of centrality, which are also very trafficated. And the more yellowish one or greenish, they are lower centrality values. And I also have used the building typologies in a way that I put into this raster the values that or different codes for different buildings in terms of how high they are or tall they are. So the height can be used also in this modeling. And how is this achieved? I have to do the biotop map, putting codes for each class of centrality and each class of building height. But once having done that, so I have the biotop codes here, but I have also in this Excel an estimate of the normalized centrality, or we can take the roads where we talk about centralities, normalized by the maximum value of centrality found in the network. And then I can use a formula to calculate the frictions for each of these identifiers, which it can find in the biotop map. And then I will generate the friction map based on these values, which I can then adjust to different species depending on what it is. For example, this common toad is an amphibian which can't fly. It will have great problems of going through and over buildings, so I will give it a very high friction value, whatever the height of the buildings. But for example, with the dragonflies, it's more like that they have more problems flying over a very tall building, but can move easily over a small house. So I can handle that different depending on how they move, the different species. And same with the roads. For amphibians, the barrier effect increase rapidly with very little expected traffic on the road, because they become killed when crossing the road. And then we have for the dragonflies, it's not really a big barrier for them, so therefore I let the friction increase more slowly with increasing centrality of each road. So here it could be that we have this biotope and we generate a resulting friction raster based on that, and that in turn will affect the dispersal patterns. In this case, I have, and this comes from the paper, I have two dispersal models that have different assumptions. In the left one, I have modeled dispersal with friction equal to 1 all over the landscape. That means that there are no barriers that affect the dispersal. However, when I have added this with a centrality-based implementation of road barriers and so on, I get a more realistic prediction of the dispersal within the city. So many areas here is white here. We expect no amphibians to move in these areas. While in the green centers here, we expect a lot of movements, and also in the yellowish parts here. And as this is observations, you can see that the model predicts the distribution of observed amphibians quite well. The dispersal modeling can be also used to predict where road kills of amphibians and other animals appear. This is a case, an actual case from Åland, where we, when I worked at Kaluna, we worked with a project where the municipality on Åland wanted to find where to put mitigation when they wanted to rebuild this road south of Mariehamn at Åland. And what we can see on the left is the road but we can also see the predicted dispersal probability according to the model. And we can see that observations of amphibians, these red and yellow ones, are at areas with predicted high probability of dispersal. On the right hand, we have combined the information of centrality with the dispersal probability, and we predict some parts of the road here to be highly risk of roadkills. And actually roadkills are at those places. Here is also a little bit higher. The probability generally decrease with the distance from Mariehamn, as expected from space syntax theory. But there are some places the killings are at the highest combination of centralities and dispersal probabilities. And I think this is a very effective tool to identify the greatest risks and make proposals of where to do mitigations of different kinds. And here is a similar case. This is a paper in progress where I have made the same kind of modeling using centralities based on road network. And here in this case, I try to predict the risk for road deers to become killed and traffic accidents caused by this mammal. And here you can see quite good correspondence. Actually, statistically, it's very good correspondence between where the risks occur and the centralities of the roads. So when ecologists have done this before, they have used a lot of parameters to make the predictions based on measurements of traffic volumes and many other things. In this case, I used just the centrality values and the probabilities, the expected probabilities of dispersal based on this model. And here is some other examples of how it can be done. Here is the functionality values. This is the amphibian example again, but outside the range that was published in the paper. And here you can see some examples of frog observation, you see that many of the observations are on land. It's only these green areas here in the middle that are the actual ponds. And the good thing with this modeling with functionality maps is that it shows where the landscape is functional, where it's close enough to the ponds where the amphibians reproduce and the land surrounding it where they feed during the summer and so on. And the functionality is here, of course, a combination of habitat quality and dispersal. So what you find here is in the north of this area is less dispersal due to this road here, and you also find lower quality. So there will be very low function, while here close to the pond, it's really high functionality, these red areas, because it's both close and of high biotope quality, habitat quality. And you can actually select a certain threshold of functionality values, in this case 5, which makes these red lines here. And you can find that most observations are actually within those ranges. You don't find any observations out here where the functionality is predicted to be much lower. And you can also make assessment of the impact of the road. One of the roads here is already built, but we can test by comparing a before scenario with an after scenario. And here in this case it's dispersal, and we see that it's somewhat more dispersal on this left side of the road, this orange road, compared to in this case. So the road makes some barrier to the movements, and probably also some roadkills, which reduce the number of individuals that reach the other side of the road. And here on the right side, you can see the affected area or the influence area where the road has some influence. And in this case, you see this road here is not a new one. It was not created at the same time. It's actually much older. But there is also an effect, but that is due to this space syntax things, that when you add this road, you will also increase the expected number of the centrality here and the expected number of vehicles that will take this route. So there will be an increased barrier also on this road, which is visible in the model. And then you can analyze this. You can use the measurement of functionality, analyze the difference between the functionality maps, and find that 21% less functionality appears within this affected area, this influence area, after the road was built. However, the high quality areas or the high functional areas, the hotspots, they haven't changed very much, which imply that you may expect that amphibians will probably not decrease very much, because the areas that are really functional is almost the same even after this road was built. But that is not always the case. It could be much worse. These highly functional areas could be fragmented and so on, and the risk of extinction can of course be high, much higher than in this case. But by comparing also future scenarios where mitigations is made, a very common mitigation of road is that you make passages under the road for amphibians, for example. And but it could also be that you create new ponds on the other side of the road. And in this case, you can see on the map, but just adding a new passage here doesn't help very much. They will not move to the other side very much anyhow. So it doesn't increase. You can compare the second. Here is the first is before road this bar, the functionality or the sum of the pixel values. And then in the second you have with the current road, the road that is there today. And with the passage, you only increase it a little bit functionality. However, if you construct a new pond on the other side, you will actually increase the functionality more than the functionality was before the road was even built. So maybe that is the best mitigation to do. On the other hand, it might be that the mitigation of creating new ponds in this landscape could be even better if you put in a more optimal site than what was done in this experiment. And in this map, which you can produce, and it's also described in the paper how to do it, you just take the difference between the quality map that was generated by the program and the functionality map. And by doing that, you get the map showing the potential for increasing the functionality at each pixel in the landscape. And by doing that, you can easily identify areas, and this is the most yellowish here, or is areas, if you put a new pond within those areas, you will get a very big change in functionality, because the biotope is already very good in terms of quality, but it's not reachable by the specimens, and therefore they can't survive in that landscape, although the land habitat is very good. So for any plans that try to improve the biodiversity or add possibilities for species to survive in an urban area or in other landscape, can use this method to really find and plan. And it's easy here to see that it doesn't matter too much probably to put the pond there, put the pond there, because if you see the arrow where I pointed, because it's the same area. So you can, but on the other hand, if you really want to make a big change, put it in this yellow area, because then you will probably change the functionality in the whole landscape much more. And that you can, of course, test by doing a new scenario analysis, like the one I showed you before. But I haven't seen any other tool that in such an effective way can show you where to do a mitigation or a restoration effort. And I will stop there, I think. I hope that I haven't make you too tired or talk too long. So we have time for discussions and so on. Thank you very much.